You know, in the pantheon of DC Comics characters, everyone has their favorite. They're either their favorite character or their favorite little subsection of the universe. Something that latches onto their heart and never lets go. For some, it's Batman and the gritty streets of Gotham. For others, it's the spacefaring adventures of the Green Lantern Corps. For others, it's the mysticism and magic of the Sandman or Swamp Thing. But for me, that love lies in Starman, the Justice Society of America, and Stargirl. And with a brand new TV series out that's just so freaking good, I needed a platform to talk about these characters that I have loved for years that are finally getting the recognition that they deserve. So welcome, one and all, to Stargazing, a guide to DC's Stargirl. Every week on Stargazing, I will give you my thoughts on the latest episode of DC's Stargirl. I'll tell you what I thought of the episode, point out some interesting analysis, or at least analysis I find interesting, and maybe even do a little Easter egg roundup. We'll see. Now, originally I had wanted to do an episode for the first and second separately, but ultimately I decided that really they should be discussed together because they really are two halves of one whole beginning of the series. So keep that in mind when we talk about these episodes. And just a heads up, we will be going full spoilers, so if you have not checked out Stargirl by now, definitely go and watch the first two episodes before you continue with this video. And really, you should watch it because it's really good. Possibly the best thing DC TV has put out, and yes, I am considering Doom Patrol and Watchmen when I say that. This is a really good show, and everyone should check it out. If you can. I know Warner Media is a little crappy with their overseas distribution in some regions. But as soon as you get a chance, I highly recommend checking it out. Preferably, if possible, on the DC Universe service, as those are the full uncut episodes, whereas the CW versions tend to trim out some stuff, including whole character introductions. So if you really want to check out this show and get the full experience, I recommend going to DC Universe. Now, originally I was going to go like beat for beat and try to discuss the whole plot, but I found myself continually getting just tied down in minutia and in the weeds, and that was just going to be boring for you guys, even if you are as huge JSA fans as I am. So rather than talking about every single little beat in this show, we're going to hit some of the highlights, discuss some of the interesting character dynamics, and what we can expect from future episodes. Now, with all that said, let's start at the beginning. Now, obviously, with a Stargirl show, you gotta focus on the JSA and establish the backstory of this universe. And that, I think, is one of the best things this show does by opening with essentially the last days of the Justice Society of America. And what an opening sequence! I mean, holy crap! If this show does anything, if this pilot does anything really, really well, that I can sum up with just this opening sequence alone, it is the efficiency of storytelling. Immediately in this opening, we get a sense of the characters we're going to be following, the world of the Justice Society and the Injustice Society. We really get the feeling that this is the DC Universe, or at least a DC Universe. We are introduced to the 4 primary members of the JSA that we're going to kind of get throughout this show. Those, of course, being Hourman, Dr. Midnight, Wildcat, and Starman, played by Joel McHale, who, I admit, when he was first cast, I didn't entirely get why. I wasn't sure, because Joel McHale is known for a very specific type of role. The asshole. Or at the very least, the charming asshole, but nonetheless the asshole. And that's definitely not Sylvester Pemberton. Sylvester Pemberton in the comics is many things, but he's not really Jeff Winger. However, I don't think that's a bad thing, particularly because it actually works to set up the relationship that this show is presenting between Sylvester and Pat. which is kind of the idea that Pat has never really seen himself as being a hero, partially because Sylvester doesn't really believe in him.
You're not in the JSA, Pat. You're my sidekick.
And while that is also open to interpretation, since, well, maybe one could argue that Sylvester was actually trying to protect Pat, especially since he probably was by this point already father to Mike, that's open to interpretation. But the text itself is very much Sylvester doesn't see Pat as a hero. And I think it really works to have Joel McHale in that role.
I told you to wait in the car!
Speaking of Pat, Luke Wilson is fantastic in this role. He's down to earth, trying his best. He's a very average kind of Joe kind of actor, and that's exactly what you should have for Pat. He is a guy just trying to do his best with this new family that he's forming. Of course, not only do we establish our heroes, we also establish our villains. Pretty much every principal Injustice Society member that we've seen gets a little bit of time to shine. We get Tigress taking on Hourman. We get Sportsmaster. We get the Wizard. We get the Gambler getting smacked around by Starman. We get Brainwave. And we get Icicle. We get Solomon freaking Grundy. Also, I gotta say, I love that they're giving Sylvester the identity of Starman. It always seemed very odd to me that Sylvester never fully took that in the comics. And yes, I know they retconned an explanation in later on as to why he didn't. But still, it's weird that he didn't at the time, because there was no Starman. Gavin had died during Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Will Payton had yet to be created. However, what's most important for any show is, of course, not just your flashy opening. It's your main cast. And this show has a fantastic cast. Breck Basinger as Courtney Whitmore is perfect. Breck embodies Courtney amazingly. I would dare say that this Courtney is actually a better introduction to the character than the version from the comics. As much as I love Stars and Stripe, one of the things that I totally understand other people saying is that Courtney is very much in the bratty teen mode for the good portion of the beginning of that series. And this version of Courtney instead has a lot more of the nuance. We see her struggling to fit into her relationship with Pat. We see her missing her father. We see how much she cares about her mother and maintaining that relationship. And we get a sense of the isolation and loneliness that she feels when they move to Blue Valley. But at the other end, we see her noble spirit, her desire to do good, her joy when she first discovers the cosmic staff and flies for the first time. Now, one of the things I actually really dig about this show is some of the adaptational changes that they've made. For instance, with the cosmic staff. In the comics, the cosmic staff was just the power source. It was a weapon, and that was it. I do like the idea that in this show, the staff itself is alive. It's not just a tool for Courtney, but a partnership, and something that connects her to Sylvester Pemberton on a more personal level. It almost reminds me of Mjolnir or Doctor Strange's cloak from the MCU, and I really dig that. I think it's a really interesting take that gives the staff a little bit more importance because it's a character in the show too. Yeah, I got a cosmic staff. What of it? I really love how the relationship between Courtney and Pat develops even over these first two episodes. The fact that we see Courtney go very quickly from disliking Pat to connecting with him and at least partnering with him in superheroing definitely works a lot better than the comics, which kind of drug out the whole she and Pat don't get along thing for a bit longer than I would like. The show also introduces one other major change to Courtney's character, the idea that she believes Sylvester Pemberton was her father. This actually goes a long way towards making her a bit more likable because, let's face it, wanting to live up to the legacy of your dead father is a heck of a lot better of a motivation to become a superhero than just annoying your stepfather. Even if it's totally not going to be what happens. Look, I'm not saying that because I don't believe they're going to change anything from the comics. Obviously they have. I'm saying that because they're being so friggin' obvious with it. Courtney's dad in the comics was a man named Sam Curtis, and he was a two-bit thug. He was a guy who worked for the Royal Flush Gang. He wasn't anyone special. And it's very clearly shown that they're setting up Courtney to believe her father is Starman, so that that belief can get knocked out of her when she finds out the truth about her father. And not only that, but it would totally disrupt the found family theme that is so central to the character. After all, that is what's so central to this story. The relationship between Pat and Courtney and how they come together as a father and daughter unit. Not to mention the fact that they also seem to be setting up a different kind of dynamic between the Justice Society and the Injustice Society. The Injustice Society is so focused on their blood legacies. We have kids for all the major members of the society, and while the Injustice Society is focused on blood legacies, the Justice Society, or the New Justice Society rather, seems to be made up of ideological legacies. People who are not connected by blood, but are inspired by the original JSA, with the obvious exception of Rick Tyler. And speaking of the Injustice Society, that's something I really love about the show. I really love that they're pulling from the original Stars and Stripe and the idea that Blue Valley is this town secretly run by villains, but instead of just taking it and filling it with random characters, they're filling it with pre-established characters that we know, and putting them in roles that make sense. Sportsmaster runs a gym. Tigress is the gym coach at Courtney's high school. The gambler is the CFO of a business. That's actually really cool. And it sets up one of the most interesting things, I think, about the show, and that is the use of genre as metaphor. Much like Buffy the Vampire Slayer before it, the genre conventions that Courtney has to face double as metaphors for the feelings and experiences that we all go through in high school. Hey, that popular girl that seems perfectly built and designed to destroy you, yeah, she's actually going to be a cyborg assassin. That gym coach who is riding you really hard, yeah, she hunts men for sport. Yeah, the super aggro gym manager would literally break your bones if given the chance. And of course, we cannot talk about these episodes without talking about our real main villain for these episodes, Christopher James Baker as Dr. Henry King, Brainwave. Oh man, I loved Brainwave so much. Christopher James Baker nails this role and actually makes Brainwave threatening. Let's face it, when your character looks like this, there's only so much that you can do with that in the comics. But this show actually made Brainwave incredibly scary. And Christopher James Baker's performance is fantastic. You really get the sense that this is just a thoroughly evil villain who is willing to do anything, including hurt his own son if need be. Now, granted, admittedly, that is me extrapolating because we don't actually see him, but it is very, very clear that Henry and Henry Jr. do not have a great relationship, possibly bordering on abuse. I also like that through Brainwave, we kind of get our first little glimpse at the Injustice Society's interpersonal relationships and how they relate to one another. For instance, Wizard was left in charge when Icicle went out of town, and yet Brainwave went directly to Icicle because he clearly doesn't really have a lot of respect for Wizard, because Wizard would rather take his family and run if there's a new Starman rather than follow through on their plan. Wizard is clearly more concerned with his personal life, with his family, whereas Brainwave is not. And it's going to be interesting to see how the other ISA members are depicted throughout the show and what their relationship with their kids are like. I'm really interested to see what Sportsmaster and Tigress are like and how they relate to Artemis. And of course, Brainwave also just has a fantastic costume. Honestly, all the costumes in the show are friggin' great. Laura Jean Shannon, or LJS, or LJ Supersuits, her and her team have done a fantastic job, and honestly, I kind of want to devote an entire episode once the season wraps to talking about all the great costuming, because, God, I could talk about LGS for hours. She is the best costume designer in superhero media right now. I love her so much. She's great. And of course, I cannot believe that I have gone this long and I haven't talked about the effects on this show. Holy crap, the effects are great. Stargirl is the first show to use pre-visual effects. This is a common practice in film, but not very common in TV shows. So the fact that they are doing this is great and really contributes to a more cinematic look for all the effects. From everything from the cosmic staff, to the ISA's powers, to, of course, the big one, Stripe. Oh, Stripe looks so good! It's so good, I love it! And not just with the practical robot that was built by Legacy Effects. No, even the CGI robot, I think, looks fantastic. I especially dig the little Made in Detroit sign that Stripe has on one of his feet. That's a nice little reference, Jeff. Good on you. And one of the most interesting recurring themes is the fact that they actually place a lot of emphasis on the patriotism aspect of the character. Keep in mind, the Stars and Stripe motif for Courtney and Pat are kind of just left over from the original concept of Star Spangled Kid. It's not really baked into their DNA like characters like Captain America or The Shield. The fact that the show actually is like, oh yeah, no, we're going to include a lot of references to America. Blue Valley being a, typical American town. Pat being or his dad being a former U.S. Army officer. The fact that the Injustice Society is no longer the Injustice Society of the world, but the Injustice Society of America. The fact that they're based out of a place literally called the American Dream, and that their big plan is called New America. They're putting a lot of emphasis on that aspect and bringing that to the forefront. It's not just kind of a leftover slapped on motif that the characters wear. It actually means something. And that's really cool. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but it's cool. Alrighty, now let's talk about some Easter eggs, because holy hell, these episodes were chock full of them. All kinds. First off, let's talk about our photos for both the Justice Society and the Injustice Society, which also help give us our full roster. So for the Justice Society, while we got really good looks at Starman, Hourman, Wildcat, and Dr. Midnight, we also see through various references and the photo, we see Jay Garrick, the Flash, Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, Hawkman, Hawkgirl, Dr. Fate, Johnny Thunder and his Thunderbolt, Wesley Dodds the Sandman, and of course, the most important member of the JSA, Hootie. We love Hootie. Now, I know a lot of people are itching to get more Alan Scott and Jay Garrick content, and I'm right there with you. But honestly, I'm kind of glad that if we are focusing on just a small group of these characters, I'm glad it's the characters that kind of don't really get a whole lot of representation in outside media. And let's face it, we just had Jay Garrick in The Flash, so, let's give Hourman a time to shine. And on the flip side, we have the Injustice Society. And what's really interesting about this lineup is that we see pretty much every member except for two throughout the episode. We know about Icicle, Tigress, Sportsmaster, Gambler, Brainwave, Grundy, and the Wizard. But the two we only get brief glimpses of in the opening, and really, one of them we don't even get a glimpse, we just see his powers, are the Fiddler, which confirms that Principal Bowen is not a gender-bent version of the Fiddler. She seems to be probably, I'm guessing, Fiddler's wife or lover, and Isaac is probably Isaac Jr., because this is clearly the male version of the Fiddler that we see. But what's most intriguing for me, as a huge fan of James Robinson's Starman run, is this. Don't recognize him? What about that shadowy hand that grabbed Dr. Midnight? That's right. It's the Shade! Shade! The Shade! The Shade! The Shade! We're getting the Shade! We're getting the Shade! We're getting the Shade! We're getting the Shade! Woo! The Shade! Woo! The Shade! 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 Oh boy, I am so excited about the prospect of seeing the Shade in live action. He is one of my favorite characters, and the fact that they have set him up to probably be introduced in a future season, probably when we inevitably go to Opal and meet Ted Knight, is so exciting, and I love that we get these little glimpses. Oh, I'm so excited! And speaking of pictures, that actually brings me to one of the more intriguing Easter eggs, in my opinion. Something that I am sure we're going to see more of in the Brainwave-focused episodes. And that's the photo that Brainwave looks at right before he puts on his costume in the first episode. Now, of course, it's easy to gather that this is probably Henry Jr.'s mother. But what's really intriguing is who Henry's mother is in the comics. Mary Pemberton, aka Mary Girl of 1,000 Gimmicks, the sister of Sylvester Pemberton. Now, this was already something I was wondering if they were going to touch on, but the fact that they actually included a photo means they absolutely are going to reference it, and I cannot wait to see how this version of Brainwave and Mary's love story unfolds. And I think the last big reference that I want to highlight is, of course, Janitor Justin. And, we'll see what happens with Janitor Justin. If you don't know Janitor Justin, don't look it up. Don't spoil yourself. Just enjoy the ride. Now it's time for reading recommendations. That's right, every week on Stargazing, I'm going to give you comic book recommendations for stories to seek out and enhance your viewing experience. Now, most of these in the future will probably be single issues or stuff that you can find either on Comixology or on DC Universe. But for this first episode, I'm going to suggest everyone pick up the Stargirl trade paperback. Newly released from DC, this trade paperback collects the entirety of the original Stars and Stripe run, as well as a story from JSA All-Stars number 4. This trade also includes some nifty little extras like character designs and a foreword from Jeff Johns himself. So I highly recommend you pick it up and check it out, especially if you have not read Stars and Stripe before. It's a great book, and I highly recommend picking it up. Oh boy, and there's still so much I feel like I could talk about. Honestly, I could talk about this show for hours, but join me next week as we talk about episode 3, Icicle. I cannot wait to see what we get in that episode. If you enjoyed this, then please give me a like, share it around to all your favorite comic book chatting places, and if you want to see more episodes, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you next week. Keep on looking to the stars, my friends.